A court in Lyon, France has upheld a 2012 ruling finding US biotech company Monsanto guilty of chemically poisoning a French farmer. Grain grower Paul Francois says he suffered neurological problems after inhaling the company's lasso weed killer. Monsanto has been ordered to fully compensate the farmer.
A dream vacation in the U.S. Virgin Islands turned into a nightmare for one Delaware family. Apparently, over time, the family was found in their villa on St. John Island, and the father was in a coma, and the two boys and the mom were suffering from severe seizures. EPA officials say a pesticide at their rented luxury villa may be to blame, and the Justice Department is now launching a criminal investigation.
Two teenagers are still in a coma after they were exposed to a deadly pesticide while on spring break with their family.
Just a week ago, Cindy Bobier had more than 1,000 flowering plants in her butterfly garden. But now, those plants sit in garbage bags. The plants had a pesticide on them called imidacloprid, and her nectar-feeding butterflies started dropping one by one.
Consumer Reports is peeling back the mystery of the chemicals in your produce. The magazine is out this morning with a study looking at pesticides in 48 fruits and vegetables. It finds that 17 contain high or very high levels of pesticides.
If you drink tea, regular tea, I don't care is what brand is that. The fact of life, this agricultural product does have pesticides.
We're finding products with upwards of 20 pesticides on a single product.
A new study links autism to pesticide exposure.
You can drink a whole quart of it and it won't hurt you.
You want to drink some? We have some here. So are you ready to drink one glass of Glyphosate?
No, I'm not an idiot. Okay, then it's finished. Then the interview is finished.
That's a good way to solve things.
Yeah.
Do you know what you're buying at the grocery store? Chances are you don't. The U.S. government has refused to allow reasonable and common sense labeling of foods that have been genetically modified in laboratories. As a result, an estimated 80% of processed foods in America contain GMOs. In 2007, Barack Obama promised to make GMO labeling a priority.
Here's what I'll do as president. I'll immediately implement country of origin labeling because Americans should know where their food comes from. We'll let folks know whether their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying. Americans should know what they're buying.
The corporations own this country. I mean, what?
The truth.
Yes.
Look, you guys.
Yeah, okay, but we talked about.
You guys work for big corporations. You are corporations, so I take that to be the truth.
Okay,
But corporations don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, the corporations we work for are a little different than Monsanto. Okay, we were talking last week about some of the stuff that is subsidized in America agriculturally, and it's all the stuff that goes into making the worst kinds of food. It's not beets and broccoli. It's
no,
only
there
sugar
should be
and
no
so
subsidy. There should be no subsidies for any food.
Okay, but after the show, a lot of people said to me that's current, why don't you talk about genetically modified foods? Okay, you're right, we should talk about genetically modified foods. And again, this is a conspiracy of both parties. Obama said in 2007, we would label genetically modified foods, which, by the way, Europe has this. China labels, China, which puts
That bastion of freedom.
And puts lead in baby food, or some shit like that.
At least you know it's there.
Okay, but we can't have that in America. You know why? Because in America, corporations run the show. Even though 9 out of 10 Americans would like foods to at least be labeled, at least we know they're Franken-foods.
Why?
Okay, they can't. Why? Because it says it would hurt sales.
No.
So shut up and eat your fucking mutant chili. That's why. Because we just put it on the label like everybody else in the world.
But you have a public role here, which is to warn people. It's not a question just
what are you
consumers
warning them of?
Of whatever it is involved in what's in the food. If it's genetically modified.
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
I'd like to know
modified.
Listen,
wait a second. Wait a second. But here are the facts.
Whether it is and what it is,
in Europe, only 5% of the food is genetically modified. Here, it's 70%.
Here's something that didn't used to exist. They didn't used to take a gene out of a bacterium and put it in corn so that the corn grows its own insecticide.
Right. That's right.
Now we do
Which,
that.
by the way, is good because then we use
I know,
less
it's awesome.
insecticide.
It's also delicious.
No, wait,
hold on. No, there's a great argument
but
for it. But if I want to make a decision about whether or not to ingest that genetically modified organism, I don't want it to be kept secret from me. If the argument against it from the industry, if the argument against it from the industry is that I will hysterically, as a consumer, make a decision if I see that label not to buy that corn. Well, the solution to that is not then to make it a secret thing that I'm ingesting it, but rather to convince me that it's safe.
And just to show that we are not partisan, you know, the villain in this is Obama to me, because he first of all, he promised blatantly that he would look into this and do something, and he didn't. He also appointed, what is the guy's name? Michael Taylor. Used to be a VP at Monsanto, the seat of evil. Be the food czar, the FDA deputy commissioner of foods. And of course, Monsanto's latest Frankenfood got speedy approval because this guy is in charge of it. Because it's like putting Jerry Sandusky in charge of Chuck E. Cheese. Of course he's going to approve with speediness. Right, let's trust the corporations to put people's health above profit, because that's what they would do.
And once again, we are the only news organization here covering this. You won't see NBC, CBS, ABC, any of the ABC corporations, you know, alphabet news agencies here filming this event, because the reality is that they don't want to sell the fact that Monsanto is tainting the food supply. And of course, because Monsanto has over 500 individuals in key positions within the government and the media. And only 6 corporations own thousands of not only newspapers and news channels, but internet websites as well that spin themselves as alternative news. But in fact, of course, they peddle GMOs and claim it's scientific. Just on the way here, actually, I saw a billboard, and it was for the Philadelphia Science Fair. And it said, sponsored by Dow. Of course, Dow AgroSciences is Monsanto's lover, best friend, sister, brother, whatever you want to call it. They are spawning genetically modified crops together and Agent Orange resistant crops. Everybody right now is screaming, GMO must go, as you may be able to hear in the background. There are literally hundreds of people with their cell phones recording this. So what's going to happen is that even though the mainstream media won't cover it for 1 second, besides some Russia Today channels and everything like that, which are alternative news really, but growing larger every day, largest views on YouTube. But what's happening is the reality is that this activism has spread a grassroots video campaign through people with their iPhones and everything like that, and us as well on naturalsociety.com, recording this. And ultimately, it will go viral online because of just the fact that so many people around the world, this is in Philadelphia right now, but just imagine around the world, this happening sometimes on an even larger scale in certain areas like Austin, which I know there was about 10,000 people supposed to turn out, San Diego, Los Angeles, etc., even New York City. But here in Philadelphia, I find it amazing because the fact that you can hear the yelling. Most people probably, you would think, wouldn't even show up to this living downtown, inner city, not really even having a Whole Foods in the vicinity. But of course, there are about 1,000+ people. Probably the most interesting part about all of this is that you can just look around and, you know, you never know who really is in line with this from on the average, you know, on your average day walking around the store, grocery store, or whatever. Such insane diversity. I mean, you have people that look straight out of a biker gang that are here and wanted to talk to us and talking about food freedom and everything like that and Monsanto's corruption, or even some people, you know, that you have no idea they care about this kind of stuff, but they do. The fact is, that's another amazing point that no one talks about. There's so much support for all of this, and in reality, you might not know it because you don't talk to people. That's why it's so rewarding to go out and share the news, print out the articles from Natural Society and other sources as well, and say, hey, you know, did you know about this? And you'd be surprised that people might say, yeah, I actually am completely aware of this. Or if they don't, they might wake up to it. I mean, we spoke earlier to individuals who said that their friends called them conspiracy theorists. But we also talked to a lot of people who said that, you know, it's common knowledge to them, really. I mean, their friends knew something was wrong. So in reality, speaking to someone is so rewarding because this can happen. I mean, we've engineered a lot of support for this activism, grassroots. I'm super happy to see this happening each day, growing in numbers. And this opens up grassroots movements that could never possibly have happened without the insurgents of marching against Monsanto. But I mean, just to look around in such a city that, you know, in my opinion, Philadelphia is kind of dead in the food freedom aspect. I mean, you look around in these buildings, it's amazing to see the contrast. These buildings, they represent many things that were once great about this country, but also, in a sense, they represent many of the corruption-based corporations that this group and others are fighting against. But at the same time, you have so many people in various ways with the Stop Monsatan posters and others. SeekTruthInfowars.com, this guy has up here. Of course, Alex Jones Infowars. That guy looks like he was grown out of the cornfield, Monsanto's cornfields, and had some type of deformity when they mixed the insect genes inside the crops. You guys like GMOs? You guys like, this is a march against Monsanto. We're marching against Monsanto.
Who that?
You know who Monsanto is?
No.
The big evil corporation that controls your food supply.
They want you to die.
They control the corn and the soy and everything else they make. It's all anything in McDonald's, any other fast food. It's all GMO, genetically modified food. It's not real food. It tastes like it, but it's not real food.
They take insect genes and animal genes and they splice it with the crop, so what you're eating is like mutated in a sense.
They mutate so it's easier for the farmers to farm and make mass production of food, but it's terrible for us, and they're feeding it to the whole world. The only way to eat healthy is eat local, eat fresh, eat the food that you know where it's grown. It's the only way.
I didn't know that at all.
Any fast food you eat, man, it's all mutated food. It's not real. It tastes real, but it's not real. It's terrible. It'll kill you. It will kill you. It's cancerous. It's carcinogenic. It will kill you. Remember that.
I didn't know that at all.
Remember that every time you eat fast food.
So who are the big six corporations that control nearly everything you see, hear, and read? So what impact does it have when an agency that's supposed to serve as a watchdog for the powerful becomes a lapdog for the powerful? To break down some of the most egregious cases of censorship and conflicts of interest in the corporate media, BTS producer Manuel Rapalo.
Hi, Abby. How's it going?
Hi, what's going on? So,
good.
You know, when I think of the top-down censorship, kind of the hand of the corporation blacking out a story, two cases come to mind that are the most egregious. The first one was News Corp. Fox News was going to air a story on the bovine growth hormone, BGH, bovine growth hormone, of course, another Monsanto case of censorship where they were invested in Monsanto for advertising, and their boss said no when a team of Fox investigative reporters wanted to cover this story. Monsanto threatened the station, sent them a letter saying there will be dire consequences, this is a direct quote, dire consequences for Fox News if the story is aired, and I wanted to play what happened when they confronted their boss about this.
I said, you know, this is news. This is important. This is stuff people need to know. And I'll never forget, he didn't pause a beat, and he said, we just paid $3 billion for these television stations. We'll tell you what the news is. The news is what we say it is.
So really, I mean, you know, you look at this case, and it's such an egregious case of censorship, and really he's saying, we'll tell you what the news is. The news is whatever we want it to be. The news is whatever our advertisers want it to be.
No, it's not just, when it comes to the media, really, it's not just the parent companies. It's also your corporate sponsors. It's also the people that are putting out the ads. I mean, Monsanto, had this story actually aired, would have probably pulled their advertisement for Roundup, for aspartame, and all those other products that again aren't tested, but advertise all over Fox News. And it's really interesting that you point out this story, because the reporters and that guy that you just played, they actually countersued against Fox under Florida's whistleblower statute. And as it turns out, under Florida law, they lost that lawsuit because turns out it's not illegal to falsify the news. So I mean, that really should give you an idea of how dangerous this is and how powerful Monsanto is. Like, they've been doing this for...
Yeah, they've been doing this for the past 10 years. Once again, another labeling issue where we see Monsanto censoring stories.
An FDA ruling approving the sale of genetically modified salmon has recharged the debate over the future of our food. Critics call the modified salmon Frankenfish, but GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, have been part of our diet for years. Most of them are corn, soy, and other crops with added DNA from other organisms to increase their resistance to disease. The Grocery Manufacturers Association says up to 80% of processed food sold in the U.S. is genetically modified, and most of it is not labeled.
Monsanto is one of the world's largest producers of genetically modified seeds. They say it should be more transparent.
Some people say, well, these GMOs can help solve world starvation and yada, yada, yada. Companies to push their seeds wherever they want.
First of all, the experts agree that GMOs have nothing to offer to feed the world, eradicate poverty, or establish sustainable agriculture. That was clear in a report done by over 400 scientists over several years, sponsored by several UN agencies. In fact, when GMOs were introduced in India 10 years ago, to much hype and celebration, now the government finally admits that it's responsible for pesticides, an estimated 250,000 suicides among farmers, and most of which have been blamed on BT cotton's failure to yield and allow farmers to even pay back their high-interest loans.
So why aren't we seeing this kind of outreach here in the U.S.? I mean, I just want to bring up a fact. I mean, in Europe, there's almost no GM crops, while here in the U.S., nearly 75% of our food products are GE tainted. Why aren't Americans outraged?
Until recently, most Americans had no idea what GMOs were. However, we're now seeing more and more awareness and agitation, and this has resulted in a natural demand for labeling so people can reject GMOs, since most Americans say that if GMOs were labeled, they would reject it. Right now, 55 U.S. congressmen have sent a letter to the FDA demanding labeling. Recently, 1 million signatures were handed into the FDA, but we're not going to wait for the federal government. It's now happening at state levels. In Connecticut,
Why shouldn't we wait for the federal government?
The administration has been walking lockstep with Monsanto and basically has taken some pro-GM people from Monsanto and related organizations and put them into key positions like food safety czar, like USDA secretary, like USAID director. So basically, if we're dealing with the federal government, we're dealing with an arm of Monsanto.
It almost seems to me, and tell me if you think this is a far stretch, that you can describe Monsanto as a pseudo-drug pusher. I mean, if a company like McDonald's puts, say, crack in its burgers, hooking consumers on their food, and just to throw in some fun, sued anyone that went to Burger King for alternative food sources, we would be up in arms. It just surprises me that there isn't as much widespread outrage on the Hill, for example, over this issue.
When people learn about Monsanto and why it was consistently voted every year as the world's most evil company, they get outraged. However, Monsanto spends billions of dollars in disinformation.
Since welcoming agro-giant Monsanto into the country in 1996, Argentina has become the world's largest soybean producer. Today, nearly 100% of its soy crop is genetically altered, with Monsanto providing much of the pesticides used in the country. But we're now learning that this overabundance of chemicals isn't just confined to Argentina's crops. A new AP report shows that they're having enormous effects on the 12 million people who live in the country's farm belt. The AP has documented dozens of cases around the country where poisons are applied in ways that are contrary to existing laws. Pesticides are showing up in the soil and drinking water, and a government report found 80% of children surveyed had traces of pesticide in their blood. As a result, people are becoming very sick. In Santa Fe, Argentina, cancer rates are 2 to 4 times higher than the national average. And in another province called Chaco, birth defects have quadrupled. But Monsanto denies that health problems in the country are caused by its pesticides. A spokesman tells the AP, quote, "The absence of reliable data makes it very difficult to establish trends in disease incidence and even more difficult to establish causal relationships. To our knowledge, there are no established causal relationships." However, many in Argentina are calling on Monsanto to take responsibility for their products, which more and more people are protesting. To discuss this, along with the latest news on the GMO front, I was joined earlier by Elizabeth Kucinich, Director of Policy at the Center for Food Safety. I started by asking her why GMOs require the use of such strong chemicals.
by chemical companies, not necessarily as you would be led to believe to increase yields or to increase nutrition, but really to be able to withstand and resist chemicals. So there are plants that are pesticide-resistant crops, such as Roundup Ready crops that you hear about, and there are also those that actually produce pesticides themselves. So it's the chemical companies really that have made this wonderful business model for themselves, in that they create a seed that is resistant to the types of chemicals that they want to apply to them. So for example, Roundup Ready corn is resistant to Roundup, which is the chemical that goes on it, or Glyphosate, which is actually called. So we see that it's just an actual partnering of the two technologies.
Wow. Well, what kinds of effects are these pesticides having on human health? And 15 years after they were initially put into use in Argentina?
Yeah, well, actually, all across the world, we've known about pesticide poisoning. It's an everyday occurrence, very sadly, among farm workers and people who live in rural communities that are neighboring fields and plantations that are being sprayed with pesticides. So we've known about it for a long time. It is a big issue in the United States as well as in countries like Argentina that you've just brought up. But I'm very glad that people are actually listening to it and actually becoming more aware of it now.
Absolutely. And of course, Monsanto is rejecting this claim outright, saying that the pesticides
Pesticides weren't always thought to be harmful. To the contrary. In 1947, Time magazine carried an advertisement claiming DDT was good for people, homes, and farms. It took 20 years before scientists realized how dangerous it was.
Welcome to the Kaiser Report. Monsanto. Monsatan. Evil genius or frankenfood? Stacy?
Max Kaiser, Monsanto is in the news. There's a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. About this case, the AutomaticEarth.com says, time to stop Monsanto and the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the case is called Bowman versus Monsanto Company, and it's case number 11-796. And the New York Times, in their piece about this, and this is setting up the AutomaticEarth.com writing about it, the Supreme Court appears to defend patent on soybean. The question in the case, Bowman versus Monsanto Company, number 11-796, was whether patent rights to seeds and other things that can replicate themselves extend beyond the first generation. The justices appeared alert to the consequences of their eventual ruling, not only for Monsanto's very lucrative soybean patents, but also for modern agriculture generally, and for areas as varied as vaccines, cell lines, and software.
Well, yeah, the patents for seeds for one purpose and one purpose only, to raise the cost of food. Are in the business of manipulating rates, interest rates, and money flows to raise the cost of agriculture in general for people by debasing currencies. There's Monsanto on the other side of this trade. They're the beneficiary of the debasement of currencies by monopolizing seed and cash crops and making it impossible for people to grow food and grow economically efficient. So this is Monsanto adding to the gulagification of the global economy. Company in the world, those are the two most hated companies. They do the most damage to the world. They're economically doing the most damage to the world, and they're run by people who are obviously in league with the devil.
That name to my uncle who was in Vietnam. They don't like them. But the Supreme Court justices did seem very favorable. Why in the world, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked, would anybody spend any money to try to improve the seed if as soon as they sold the first one, anybody could grow more and have as many of those seeds as they want?
Right, and of course you mentioned the Vietnam War in reference to the Agent Orange that they use to defoliate, and that's the primary of their business is to destroy agriculture. And if they can do so by patenting seeds and by gaming the intellectual property laws, then so much better. And of course, the other magical thinking that goes into Monsanto's mind is that when the seeds blow around, they then sue people for having seeds on their property that are patented by Monsanto that the wind blew there. So effectively, Monsanto is suing God. Their position is that God is a moron, according to Monsanto, which I guess is in keeping in today's world of retiring popes and other things that are going on.
Well, humans would still be hunting, gathering. Why the hell would we even bother to work if nobody was going to pay us to do it?
Knowledge. This is adding to our experience as human beings. What Chief Justice Knucklehead is saying is that every time he farts, he wants to get paid for it because he owns the DNA of his fart.
The question in this case, this farmer, the 76-year-old farmer from Indiana, he's okay with the notion of copywriting life and copywriting genes. And now Monsanto basically owns the entire soybean supply in all of America. They have 93% of the market because they of the gene. So essentially, they've been awarded the patent for all soybean seeds because they own the entire supply.
Right, and it's a vertical devastation in that they also sell fertilizers that only work with their patented products. They sell various other extensions and brand extensions and intellectual property extensions that only work with Monsanto's product. There's their hardcore monopoly, which drive prices up. In India, where Monsanto is active and they've manipulated and patented seeds, you've got something like 2,000 Indian farmers committing suicide. It could be every week, a number of that high magnitude, and that'll be the case of farmers around the world if Monsanto has their way. I'm sure that Goldman Sachs will package suicide farmer collateralized debt obligations and make additional money on farmers killing themselves.
The Automatic Earth says for 10,000 to 20,000 years, people all over the world have been improving agricultural crops in multiple ways, changing plants from their wild origins to their present domesticated versions. One of the most important changes, obviously, has been to make it easier to save seeds and plant these in the new year for the next harvest. No mean feat. Monsanto now simply takes all of this away in just a few years' time, with impunity and with encouragement from the U.S. government and Supreme Court.
Right. I mean, it's important to keep in mind, look, they're not agriculture anti-competition. They're anti-agriculture. They're trying to turn seeds into a currency, and they want to monopolize that currency. And they're doing a great job doing it. And of course, the Supreme Court, which is now heavily favored toward corporations, will go along with this scheme. And the net result will be higher prices and starvation. And of course, because like Lloyd Blankfein and Goldman Sachs, they believe they're doing God's work, they'll look down from their mighty position of intellectual property, Mount Olympus, and just say, well, you died, you starved to death, you deserved it, and we're Monsanto, to hell with you.
A study by the Center for Food Safety found that 53% of the world's commercial seed market is controlled by just 3 firms, Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta.
Right, that's not competition. Anyone who argues on behalf of Monsanto is arguing against free markets. They're arguing against competition. They're arguing against agriculture. Of years, and yet that form of Monsanto for predatory profits, which they will use to their monopoly in areas bed with that other. He destroyed it.
Well, Microsoft is actually coming up in this next headline here because they're involved in this case. They've issued their own statements in support of Monsanto's position. But before we go on to that, I want to mention that the Automatic Earth asks, and if a farmer cannot own his seeds, what about his animals? Or what if Monsanto figures out a gene variation that limits your own personal risk of a disease, say cancer? Does it own you outright then? Or will it only give you the choice between becoming a debt slave or dying young?
Well, they argue for private property rights, and I would say that there's a difference between private property rights and monopolies. You know, you need monopolies, and free competition don't exist harmoniously. And this is a play for monopolizing this industry in a way that not only is anti-competitive, but it's anti-human. It's borderline eugenicism is what it is. You'd have to go back to experiments of eugenics to find something as abhorrent as a Monsanto and what they're doing with seeds.
So earlier you brought up Microsoft. So I want to get back to them because if Monsanto wins this, areas regarding copy. This is from Bloomberg. Monsanto, JCPenney, BSA, the software.
The Supreme Court.
Research universities and biotechnology companies say a victory by Bowman would harm their ability to license their work in cancer research, crop protection, and nutrition.
It is shockingly on the side of eugenics in this case. And the ability for cell and zygotes of human, your body starts to heal itself. Microsoft will say, well, we own the patent on the DNA that you're using against our patent to heal. You have to send us a check and we'll release a version of the patent, but only if you agree with us politically. Only if you support a continuation to become fully integrated monopolies. If you don't,
finally, on this story, the Automatic Earth sums up, our right to feed our children has been made subordinate to the right of chemical companies to change the very food we count on to keep our children fed. To top it all off, the modern food industry claims that it and it alone provides the necessary tools without which our children would go hungry. God's work indeed. Makes you wonder what keeps the devil occupied these days.
what they represent as human beings anymore. They're stressed out, they're on drugs, they're eating genetically modified food, they're dying, life expectancy is decreasing, and the Monsanto and Bill Gates are laughing all the way to the bank.